There are so many insightful and important written works done on issues that are just locked behind the paywall. Unless you're in college or could afford it, you don't have access to them. This article sheds light on the non-violence Palestinians have used to resist their occupation and brutal treatment by Israel. I wish to make the contents of this article public by putting it in the audio-visual form as a video on YouTube. The pinned comment will have links where you can donate to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund or Care for Gaza, both of which are doing amazing work in helping Palestinian families in need as this genocide continues. Please donate to them if you are able. If you can't donate, you can start doing the Daily Click for Palestine on Arab.org. Link will also be in the pinned comment. I will now start the video proper. If only there was a Palestinian Gandhi. In recent years, this has been a common sentiment expressed by leading international figures such as US President Barack Obama. This is part of a wider liberal argument that failures to establish sustainable peace between Israel and the Palestinians is primarily the result of Palestinian militancy, and if the Palestinians embrace nonviolence, they would gain the support of the international community, including the US, as well as find a resonant response within Israel itself. In reality, however, Palestinians have a long history of utilizing nonviolence in their resistance to oppression. Yet this nonviolence has been brutally repressed by Israel, and the international community has, for the most part, failed to acknowledge and support Palestinian nonviolence. As Arundhati Roy argues, nonviolence is a piece of theater and requires a responsive audience in order to be effective. The lack of engagement with Palestinian nonviolence strips it of much of its transformative capability. In this article, we explore the use of violence and nonviolence in the Palestinian struggle. We then assess the potential of nonviolent action to achieve Palestinian rights in accordance with international law. The perception that violence is the most effective means of resistance persists within mainstream international relations. However, as demonstrated by Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephen, nonviolent resistance is actually considerably more effective than its counterpart. Their examination of 323 movements between the years of 1900 and 2006 found that nonviolent campaigns were successful 53% of the time, compared with just 26% for those that used violence. It is therefore imperative to challenge the dominant assumption that nonviolent tactics are of little strategic value. Notwithstanding the ongoing definitional debates, nonviolence can broadly be characterized as waging conflict through social, psychological, economic, and political means without the threat or use of violence, with the aim of mobilizing publics to oppose or support different policies, to delegitimize adversaries, and to remove or restrict adversary sources of power. There are two main schools of thought within the field, summarized broadly as principled and strategic nonviolence. The former is where individuals or a group reject all forms of violence out of moral or religiously based belief. Strategic or pragmatic violence, on the other hand, views nonviolence as the most effective tactic in conflict. In contrast to how nonviolence has been depicted, Kurt Schoch reminds us, nonviolent action is not inaction, although it may involve the refusal to carry out an action that is expected, i.e. an act of omission. It is not submissiveness, it is not the avoidance of conflict, and it is not passive resistance. In fact, nonviolent action is a direct means for prosecuting conflicts with opponents and an explicit rejection of inaction, submission, and passivity. Leading nonviolence theorist Gene Sharp's typology of nonviolent action includes acts of protest or persuasion, such as marches and protests, non-cooperation, such as boycotts and strikes, and intervention, such as civil disobedience, sit-ins, hunger strikes, and building parallel or alternative social institutions. Decisions about which actions to adopt are often driven by whether nonviolent activists are undertaking moral jujitsu, persuading or converting the thinking of opponent, either directly or through influencing a third-party intermediary, or political jujitsu, more coercive nonviolent tactics that make the cause of repression diplomatically, economically, or socially prohibitive. Debates occur, of course, over whether certain acts fall within the ambit of nonviolence, with the context being crucial. For example, in movements that have previously undertaken strikes and marches, incorporating the tactic of stone throwing would be considered a move away from nonviolence, whereas the same act can be considered a move towards nonviolence if the movement has previously undertaken armed resistance. The reality of conflict means that violent and nonviolent campaigns often occur contemporaneously by different groups, particularly if nonviolent action does not engender the sought-after response. The literature on popular struggles against oppression shows that patterns of resistance generally take the shape of a bell curve, where a small portion is collaborative, most of it nonviolent, some of it violent, and some of it extremely violent. On the basis of this brief overview of nonviolence theory, we consider the evolution of Palestinian nonviolent resistance and its successes and frustrations, whether it is realistic to believe that nonviolence can bring about a just solution to the Palestinian situation, and what steps might be taken to this end. While the focus of the article is on Palestinian nonviolence and the associated global nonviolent movement to achieve Palestinian rights, it must be recognized that such an approach cannot prejudge other forms of resistance carried on within the limits of international law and in furtherance of the goals of global justice. The right to armed struggle, as outlined in the Geneva Convention Additional Protocols, Article 1 of 4, with its specific reference to armed conflicts in which peoples are fighting against colonial domination and alien occupation and against racist regimes in the exercise of the right of self-determination, has become an established norm of international law. Thus, as with all peoples, rights of resistance belong to the Palestinian people and their representatives. These rights to resistance were reinforced by the near-unanimous 2004 ICJ advisory opinion on the legality of Israel's separation wall, which determined that Israel's right to security cannot be invoked to override the right of Palestinians to self-determination. Furthermore, it is the right of the Palestinian people alone to decide how their right to self-determination can be most effectively exercised within the constraints of international law.